Hello and welcome back to the competitive biography of Emanuel Lasker. Today we're looking at Game 4 of the match between Mieses and Lasker. Due to the two draws in the previous two games, we're in the exact same position as we were at the start of game number 2, so there's not too much to talk about. Let's skip the preamble and get into the chess. For this game, the players repeat the first few moves that they played in game number 2. So Mieses opened with e4, e5, knight to c3, bishop to c5, g3, knight to c6, bishop to g2, a6, d3, d6, knight g to e2, and now in game 2, Lasker went for the rather uncommon move bishop to g4. In this position, he opts for the more common knight g to e7. Mieses continues in the same way he has before by playing the move knight to d5, and now further, I mentioned in the second game that Mieses faced knight captures on d5 against Alexander Fritz at the Breslau tournament of 1889, but in this position, Lasker decides instead to simply castle. Mieses castles as well, and Lasker goes for the move bishop to e6. Now, we already have a position that hasn't been played too many times before. I found a game in the database where white started expanding with c3, and after f6 played the move d4, and while white went expanding, black went retreating. Played bishop back to a7, and after bishop to e3, he played bishop to f7 even. Following white playing queen to d2, we saw the exchanges start to take place. E takes d4, knight e7, bishop d4, and after knight c6, bishop a7 and rook a7. This was played in the game between Terry Shaw and David Lovejoy at the 1982 Australian Championship, with white going on to winning this game. But Mieses continues with the same fashion that he's continued in with pretty much every single one of these games, king to h1. This move is a novelty, and so it's as of move 9 that the players are playing a unique game. Seeing the king enter the corner, Lasker decides to play the move queen to d7, going after this bishop on g2 and taking advantage of the fact that it can't retreat anywhere. This move received some criticism by the commentators of the day, as this g2 bishop isn't really worth hunting down at the moment, as it's staring into the pawn on e4, but it's what Lasker decided to go with. And after knight captures on e7, he further commits with knight captures on e7, and f4 really forces him to go now or never. Some commentators were talking about moves like f5 and lines starting with this in this position, but Lasker was always going to be playing the move bishop to h3. Mieses has nothing better to do than to trade, so bishop captures h3, queen captures h3, and f5. Mieses's play has been very consistent. He always goes for this king h1 and f4, f5 business. This shouldn't come as a surprise to Lasker, but in this particular position with the queen on h3, it's a little bit more potent than usual. There are a couple of different threats that Lasker has to deal with in this particular position. For example, f5, f6 is what white is planning to play next. You can stop this as back by playing the move f6 yourself, but now white gets access to knights to g1. You have to exchange, so bishop g1, rook g1, and now white has the very straightforward plan of playing g4, rook to g3, and this queen is starting to get in a little bit of trouble. So best for black turns out to be the move h5, where after g4 black's allowed to take, let's take the pawn please, and you don't capture right away as white, you first flick in rook to g3, and after the queen retreats somewhere, rook captures on g4, and it will be white that's doing the attacking on this open g-file. There is also a world where if black plays slowly enough and white is able to get in the moves c3 and d4, importantly cutting off this bishop, then suddenly knight to g1 is coming with threats of trapping the queen. So Lasker decides to deal with this by retreating his queen back to h5, but now he allows Mieses to thrust forward with f6, which he does. G captures f6, rook captures f6. Now to properly illustrate just how difficult this position is for Lasker, I'm going to show you what the best sequence is. d5 makes the most fundamental sense. White is trying to create action on the wing, so you want to be responding with something in the center. Now, white isn't going to take this because knight captures d5 hits the rook, and after it retreats, black is able to start developing and get a reasonably playable position. However, if we take a look at the move that Mieses will play in the game, queen to f1, we see that there's a lot of jockeying back and forth with these tactics. For example, d captures on e4 from black. White doesn't recapture right away. They first get to flick in the move bishop to h6. Now, you can move the rook, but then you're going to start running into kingside attacks, so the best for black to survive this and not get attacked is to counterattack with knight to d5, going after the rook. This doesn't work right away, because after bishop captures f8, the bishop on c5 is hanging, so you have to play bishop captures on f8, and now the rook is able to slide down to f5. Queen to g6 and rook captures on e5 seems to simply leave white up the exchange, but black is just in time to save things by playing knight to e3. After the queen moves somewhere, let's say queen to c1, queen to f6, and white has to give back some material. So queen captures e3, queen captures on e5, and things are almost completely fine for black, but unfortunately for them, at the end of the line, white has access to knight to c3. The e4 pawn is about to fall, and with black being down a pawn and having the worst pawn structure, they will be on the worst side of this endgame. It's not lost for them by any means, but it is going to be an absolute miserable time trying to defend this. So while objectively speaking, that's the best way forward for black, I don't expect Lasker to see all of that, and even if he didn't, I wouldn't expect him to want to play that position. So it makes a lot of sense that he tries the move king to h8 instead. He wants to vacate the g8 square for some of his other pieces. And after queen to f1, he indeed throws the knight back to g8, hitting the rook. The rook slides to f5, and now queen to g6, same as in the other position. Mieses moves his queen up to f3, and now Lasker responds with the move f6. Now, in this particular position, a lot of the commentators wanted to take advantage of this queen to f3 move by playing the pawn forward to g4, and they noted that in this particular position, on knight e7, rook h5, black doesn't have access to this break f5, which in a lot of cases is quite good for him. Mieses instead decided to play the move bishop to d2. He allows knight e7, rook h5, and f5, and this almost equalizes for Lasker. If he gets to play one more move, then f captures e4 opens up tactics on the f-file, and black is able to counterattack quite effectively. But white has access to one very good move that keeps the advantage firmly in his favor, and Mieses finds it, rook to f1. Now, rook to f1 is very nice at stopping fe4, because there are some very nice tactics here. Queen f8, rook f8 with check, and if the king moves to g7, then white gets to play bishop to h6 with check. The rook does a very good job of cutting off every single square that the king can go to. So queen h6 is forced, and after rook h6, king f8, rook h7, we finish this line with white being up the exchange. These two outside passed pawns are very strong, and white is just completely winning. So Lasker makes a really heads-up decision. He throws his queen back to g8, ensuring that the d5 square is overprotected, so that on e captures on f5, which is what Mieses plays, he's able to very safely thrust forward with d5. Lasker's only hope in this position is trying to meet this attack on the flank, again, with an attack in the center. He does have very nice central pawns, but he is down a pawn, and the extra pawn is a very advanced passed f-pawn, so Mieses is definitely winning in this position, don't get me wrong. Lasker's doing what he can, but he's certainly worse. The problems for Lasker compound because Mieses still has the initiative. Bishop to h6 comes in this position. The rook goes to f7 to avoid the attack, and now rook to g5. The queen is forced away, so it goes to e8, and now Mieses plays queen to g4. Bishop to g7 check threatens to win the exchange. So Lasker deals with this through tactics by playing knight to g6, taking advantage of the fact that the rook on f1 is now undefended. But after Mieses moves it to e1, what does Lasker do? Now his knight is actually hanging, and he has to find some way to escape this, and he chooses to do so by moving the knight back to e7. He simply submits to the loss of the exchange. There's just nothing for him to do. Bishop g7, rook g7 was played. Now Mieses is up a pawn and the exchange, and Lasker's in a position that I would say is pretty resignable, but he decides to play it on. It's only move 28. Mieses doesn't have a breakthrough just yet, so the extra material, while bad, isn't fatal. So Lasker plays the move queen to f8, poking the rook. It slides back down to g5, and now knight to g8 from Lasker. Now here, Mieses plays the move knight to c3. It's not a bad move, but a lot of the commentators were heavily criticizing it. One of the reasons behind this is because they endorse the move d4, which is very direct, and there is a line that they give that leads to a very easy win for white. E captures d4, knight captures d4. After knight to f6 pokes the queen and sends it over to h4, black seems to have a really good move in knight to e4, hitting the rook and cutting off the queen's defense of the knight here on d4. But white is just in time with the move knight to e6, and the square they choose to put the queen on is f6, at which point rook to h5 forces the queen trade, as you can't deal with this threat here on h7. Once the queens come off the board, black's chances of a counterattack are much lower, and white should be able to win this game much easier. Mieses' move of knight to c3 doesn't spoil anything. It doesn't lead to a direct win, so that's why there's a lot of criticism, but it's perfectly fine on its own. Lasker continues moving his knight. It goes to f6. And after queen to f3, Lasker has to defend his d5 pawn, so he does so with the move queen to d6. So with the d-pawn being sufficiently protected and there not really being any more ways to throw fuel onto the fire, Mieses retreats his knight back to d1, and after rook to e8 puts it on f2. This is another reason why the knight to c3 criticism was so harsh. Not only was d4 a much more direct path to victory, but even when the knight was on c3, Mieses had no idea what to do with it, and so he's going on this very long knight maneuver that's allowing Lasker to get developed and start creating counterattacking chances. Again, the advantage hasn't been thrown away and Mieses is still completely winning, but he lacks direction. Lasker stays consistent, he strikes in the center with e4, and Mieses plays what looks like an unintuitive move, queen to e2. The point here is that e captures on d3 once again runs into back rank problems, because after queen e8, knight e8, rook e8, this rook here on g5 is doing a beautiful job ensuring that the black king can't move anywhere. Queen to f8 is forced, and after rook f8, bishop f8, knight d3, white ends this simply up a rook, completely winning, game over. So Lasker first has to take a second to play the move queen to c6, supporting his rook, and now e captures on d3 is back on the cards. Now, by virtue of Mieses' weird knight maneuver, the commentators of the day thought that Mieses had already lost his advantage. However, in this particular position, he has exactly one move that allows him to stay completely winning. So, what I want you to do, pause the video, see if you can find the move that Mieses has at his disposal to keep this game firmly under his control. Alright, 3, 2, 1. Once again, the commentators of the day were really favorable toward the move d4. This is the main move given, though in this particular position, it doesn't do quite as much for white. After bishop captures d4 and c3, the line they give is bishop f2, queen f2, and now queen to d6. And after h4, white has to face c5, d4, and the central pawn mass. Indeed, white still has the material advantage, but this rook on g5 is really not doing anything useful. It's not going to be able to help with this struggle in the center, and black should have the resources for some sort of equality here. However, the move the commentators all missed, whether it was because of their pessimism or simply because this move was just not findable, they missed the move knight to g4. It turns out that this knight here on f6 is playing a crucial role in keeping the black position from falling apart on the spot, and this threat of trading causes everything to fall apart on the spot. For example, if the knight avoids the trade by going back to, let's say, d7, then white is even free to push f6 here. Knight f6, queen f6, black has to deal with the fact that their d-pawn falls. This e-pawn is not enough on its own, and white's going to win. If you trade here on g4, then simply rook captures g4, and now white is able to simply take on e4, and the black pawn center falls apart. And finally, if black keeps the knight on f6 and doesn't touch it, plays a move like, let's say, e3, then white's going to trade on f6 and play the move queen to h5, keeping the rook defended for just one more move. After, let's say, rook to f8, white is free to play the rook back to g4. Yes, this does give up the f-pawn, but black is not going to take it because that would involve trading queens, and we can see that this rook on the 4th rank is much more active than the rook in the d4 variation. So white will maintain their material advantage, their pieces are nice and active, and they should have an easily winning endgame. But Mieses, once more, did not find the best move. Whether it was from time trouble, as this is move 35, or just good old-fashioned miscalculation, Mieses here played the move d captures on e4. He misses some tactic, I'm not sure precisely what, but now his position goes from winning to losing. Lasker simply retakes the pawn on e4 with his knight, and I'm going to guess that what Mieses missed was that after knight captures e4, rook captures e4, the queen has to abandon the rook, because if you play a move like, let's say, queen to d1, then rook captures e1, queen captures e1, and black has d4 with check. The king is forced over to g1, and d3 comes with check. Now you have two options. You either block somewhere with the queen, and you lose the queen, or you play king to f1, at which point queen to h1 is checkmate. So Mieses avoids that by playing knight to d3, but now Lasker does not take the rook here on g5, but rather he plays the only good move, knight f2 with check. Knight captures f2, rook captures e2, rook captures e2, bishop captures f2, and rook captures f2 were played. Mieses still has the material lead, as he has an extra pawn and 2 rooks for the queen. That does technically leave him up 2 points of material, but these uncoordinated rooks are just completely awful, and Lasker very easily shows why his queen is superior, by once again playing the only move in this position that doesn't lose, d4, with another discovered check from the queen. Mieses plays king to g1, and again Lasker plays the only move in the position, d3. This position is a pawn race between this d-pawn and Mieses' f-pawn. Now the simple tactics in this position all favor Lasker. If the c pawn takes on d3, then queen to c1 comes with a check, picks up the rook on g5. Very straightforward. If white plays rook to d2, taking advantage of the fact that this pawn can't move because of the same back rank issues we previously addressed, black has access to this absolute bomb queen captures on c2. You can't take because the pawn will queen, and if you do nothing, then the rook will be taken. Finally, f6 forces a little bit more precise play from black. D captures c2, rook captures on c2 is now available, queen captures c2, and f7. It almost looks like black is unable to stop this pawn from queening, but after a check on the back rank, king to g2, queen to b2 with check, king to h3, black again has one more move to save, and it's the very beautiful queen to g7. The pawn can't promote, and if you trade everything off, then black's queenside pawn majority will very easily decide in the king and pawn endgame. So Mieses doubtlessly had a whole lot of time to think this over. He's about to make his 41st move, so the players have made the time control, and he has all the time in the world to think about how he wants to lose this game, and he decides to go with the move c3, trying to take advantage of closing this pawn chain off, and now f6 is a huge threat, but once again Lasker finds the only move that keeps his advantage, queen to e4. The threats behind this move are demonstrated right away after Mieses supports his rook with h4, because Lasker plays the move d2. If the rook takes on d2, then queen to e1 check, again picks up the rook. So Mieses instead decides to play the move f6, but Lasker simply creates a queen. And it was after this, on move 43, that Mieses resigned the game. Despite the result, I think this was the best game Mieses has played so far. He had a terrific position out of the opening due to some uncharacteristically weird play from Lasker, and his play with the initiative was very nice. I mean, bishop h6, rook g5, queen g4 was especially nice, setting up this bishop to g7 idea, and when he was playing with the initiative, Mieses was just completely unstoppable. But it seems like he sort of lost his way right up around this point, and as we saw, d captures on e4 was a horrible blunder that just turned the game from winning to losing. It certainly happens, but it seems like that's happened with Mieses more than once. So with this, the score is now 2-0 in favor of Lasker, and I would say the match is finally starting to heat up in earnest. There's much more chess to be covered, and so there will be many more videos coming out. I look forward to seeing you there. Until then.